Hey everyone, this week we're talking about Trainwreck, the cannabis strain with one of the most chaotic names and one of the most disputed origins in all of cannabis history. Guys, this one is truly some lore. The legend goes like this. Back in the 1970s, there were two brothers, and they were growing cannabis on a hillside outside of Arcata in Northern California. And one day, a train derailed in the valley below, and supposedly that's where the name came from. But here's the thing. Nobody can agree on who these brothers were, who held the original cut, and even exactly what Trainwreck is. As you'll see, this isn't an accident. It's a direct result of the world this strain came from, Humboldt County. If you're new to this channel, this is where I cover the history of cannabis, including the strains, the people, and the stories that shaped this entire culture. Hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Let's start with the name, Trainwreck. Most people assume it's named purely after that train crash incident. There's also a simpler story, that it got its name based off how hard the weed itself hit. But there's a third, deeper meaning that comes straight from the old school Northern California growers. To them, Trainwreck was a way of breeding. Here's how it worked. You'd take a male plant and throw it next to a whole variety of different female plants. Once everything pollinated, you'd keep the best offspring that emerged from the chaos. The result was a genetic collision, a pileup of different lineages, all crashing together in one plant. It was a train wreck of genetics. Growers up in Humboldt and Mendocino were doing this long before any single strain called Trainwreck ever existed. And honestly, that's what makes the name itself such a mystery. Did Trainwreck get its name from an actual train crash in the valley below the farm? Did it come from this chaotic pollination technique? Or did it come from something else entirely, lost to time? The truth is, nobody knows for sure. There are a handful of competing theories, and not one of them can be proven. And to understand why the Trainwreck story is such a mystery, you have to understand the place it came from. Trainwreck was born in the Emerald Triangle, 3 counties in Northern California, Humboldt, Mendocino, and Trinity. For decades, this area quietly grew more than half of all the cannabis consumed in America. Now, the history of the Emerald Triangle is fascinating and vast. We could talk about it for hours, and honestly, I probably will in future videos. But for now, let me cover the basics, because this is a world that produced Trainwreck. It all started in the late 1960s and 70s, when a generation of Bay Area hippies drove north, looking for cheap land and a way out of industrial society. They had been radicalized by Vietnam and by the free speech movement, and by the entire psychedelic community that emerged in San Francisco. And as they drove north, they found what they were looking for in the Redwood Hills. And as they settled in, cannabis became the cash crop that supported their entire way of life. The terrain itself was perfect. Coastal fog, redwood cover, and mountains that were nearly impossible for law enforcement to surveil. And these weren't casual growers either. They were building a farming tradition, passed down through families, in one of the most ideal cannabis growing environments on Earth. And here's the thing about these growers that you need to remember for the rest of this story. The people who built the Emerald Triangle wanted to be off the grid more than anyone else in cannabis history. That was the entire point. They migrated north to get away from industrial society, away from the government, and away from anyone watching. And then they started growing a federally legal crop in the most remote corner of Northern California they could find. But don't picture a few hippies with some plants in the backyard. The scale of these operations was massive. A single Humboldt farm could have hundreds or even thousands of plants, each one yielding over a pound. That equates to hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Entire towns like Garberville and Redway ran quietly on the cash that flowed down out of those hills every October. And despite all that money, the growers stayed invisible. It was simply the key to survival. Being identified as a cannabis farmer from the 1970s all the way up to 2016 meant real legal exposure. It could result in raids and even prison, so they didn't put their names on anything. They didn't keep records, and they didn't seek out credit. And that's exactly why the history of Trainwreck is so fuzzy. The strain came out of a community whose entire survival depended on leaving no paper trail. The people who could tell us exactly where Trainwreck came from are the same people who spent their lives making sure no one could ever find out who they were. The mystery gap isn't in the record. It's the whole point of how these growers lived. And these growers weren't just hiding for the fun of it. They were growing under siege. Starting in the 1980s, the government launched the Campaign Against Marijuana Planting, or CAMP for short. At its peak, more than 110 agencies took part, making it one of the largest law enforcement operations in U.S. history. Helicopters swept the Redwood Hills looking for gardens. Residents even sued, claiming they were being watched by U-2 spy planes, the same aircraft built for CIA Cold War missions. Here's where the Trainwreck story gets really interesting, and even more hazy. The real, original Trainwreck was a clone-only strain. That means it wasn't passed around as seeds. It was passed around as cuttings. Live clippings from one specific mother plant were handed grower to grower. This is a huge deal because a clone-only strain can't be easily reproduced by just buying a pack of seeds. You either have the genetic clone clipped off the original mother plant, or you don't. And for years, the only way to get a true Arcata Trainwreck was to know someone in Northern California who physically had the cut. That's also why, when seed banks eventually tried to capture Trainwreck in seed form, the disputes exploded. Multiple companies released their own versions, each claiming to trace back to that original Arcata cut. And some growers still claim that they're the only ones holding the true original clone. People who lived in California in that era talk about it with great reverence. They got to try the real Trainwreck before the rest of the world ever could. And that brings us back to the legend itself. The Trainwreck origin story is really a perfect example of how cannabis mythology works. Ask around about where Trainwreck comes from, and you'll get dozens of different answers. There's the two brothers in the train crash near Arcata, a version where the crash brought in emergency responders who nearly exposed the grow, forcing those brothers to relocate. And then there are the tall tales that get wilder from there. One popular story even claims it was bred in the mountains of Mexico and shipped north by train. Are either of these examples true? Who knows? But that's not the point. It's that the people who gave the world Trainwreck never wanted us to know its true origins. So we've talked about the legend of Trainwreck, but let's now take a quick look at what's actually in the plant, because the genetics are almost as wild as the story. Trainwreck is a sativa-dominant hybrid with 3 landrace parents: Mexican sativa, Thai sativa, and Afghani indica. And those 3 parents each tell a story of their own. The Mexican genetics connect back to the Acapulco gold tradition. Thai genetics bring us back to the Thai stick era. And then there is Afghani indica that underpins almost all of modern breeding. So Trainwreck sits right at the intersection of 2 great eras of cannabis. The old import era, when weed was smuggled in, and the new domestic era, when Americans started growing their own. And then there's how it actually hits. The aroma is Trainwreck's signature: pine, lemon, cedar, with an earthy, spicy bite that longtime smokers recognize almost instantly. And the high matches it: euphoric, energetic, uplifting, creative. It hits fast and hard, which is why the name resonates so much. This is a true daytime sativa, the kind of strain people reach for when they want to get things done. But here's the part that matters the most. The signature aroma wasn't a product of the genetics alone. It was also a product of the Humboldt climate, the coastal fog, the redwood environment, the sage and Douglas fir surrounding the gardens. The strain literally captured the landscape it grew in. True outdoor Arcata Trainwreck just couldn't be reproduced in an indoor warehouse somewhere else. You could have the clone, but if you didn't have Humboldt, you didn't have the whole thing. So let's wrap this up. In 2016, California legalized recreational cannabis. And for the old Emerald Triangle growers, the ones who had protected strains like Trainwreck through decades of raids, it was brutal irony. Compliance costs and licensing fees piled up, and the wholesale price of marijuana collapsed from thousands of dollars per pound down to hundreds. The growers had survived the helicopters. What nearly finished them was the paperwork. But Trainwreck endured. It's still growing today, it's still crossed with countless other strains, and it's still sought after for that sharp, pine citrus bite. And here's the thing, after all of it, almost nothing about this strain is known for certain. We don't know the brothers' names. We don't even know which version of the story is true. But maybe that's fitting. Trainwreck was born from chaos, a collision of different genetics, a collision of the import era and the homegrown era, a collision of different legends. The lore itself is a Trainwreck in every sense of the word. And that's the story of Trainwreck. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more cannabis history content. I drop new videos every week or so on the strains, the people, and the stories that shape this whole culture. And if you want to go deeper, check out my book, Cannabis Lore. I covered Trainwreck, Humboldt County, and a bunch of other stories in a lot more detail. The link's in the description. Thanks for watching.